Hello, since recording the latest update for you as small business owners, we have had breaking news in terms of other announcements. And that's all to do with the furlough scheme. The furlough scheme itself has now been confirmed to be extended till the 31st of March and will also include that 80% all the way until the end of March. That's great news. That's going to give comfort, and it's going to mean that small businesses can plan accordingly and understand exactly what's happening with their cash flow. Also, self-employed income support scheme, that's also been extended, and we can also see that that is going to be at 80%, not reduced down to the 40%. So that's great news as well.
Hello and welcome to the latest in our COVID rapid fire video interrogations. We're going to be talking to Aaron Patrick, our favourite finance and bookkeeping expert in today's session. And we're going to be interrogating him all about what's going on. Are we doing furlough? Are we in job support territory? What does it really mean for small businesses? So I'm not going to beat about the bush. There are a lot of answers to some very important questions that we need. Aaron, welcome back.
Hi, Emily. Thank you for having me on.
It is always a pleasure. It's definitely our pleasure because we get so much out of these sessions. So, Aaron, what's going on?
Yeah, again, it's deja vu in the worst possible way, unfortunately. From a small business point of view, the most important thing to note and the most important thing to understand is that there is some support out there still. So let's just give a brief kind of history of what's happened. So at the start of the year, we went into furlough, and at the time furlough felt like a whole new scheme to us that, it seemed like a lifeline away. We've never heard of the word before. Suddenly these new schemes were coming up, and suddenly we were having to think fast and be able to make sure that we get support available. So in essence, all furlough was designed to do was to give us support for our staff and make sure that we can still continue to at least pay them a percentage of their wage and keep them in employment while businesses were forced to shut and forced to close down. As that started to ramp down, though, and we started to come out of national lockdown, and we started to see that there was some recovery coming on, and we were starting to open up shops and open up businesses, then furlough itself started to reduce in the amount that it was actually going to provide. And it was coming to a point where furlough was going to end. And when it was going to end, we were going to get what was called job support scheme instead. And the idea was we transitioned from furlough to job support, and we were going to move on from there. Now, job support itself was causing a lot of issues in terms of eligibility and how that was going to help businesses, and especially for small businesses in terms of where does it actually fit and how's that going to protect my jobs and protect the client, our staff. And thankfully for small businesses and for everything that's going on, when the terrible news that we're going back into national lockdown came along, and we weren't going into these tier systems again, which was causing confusion. When we go into national lockdown, we were also given the news that we're going to get a furlough scheme back again.
Right, and that's great, and thank you for that recap. It has been such a confusing year with rules changing left, right and centre. I know we're going to come on in a moment to what that has meant for bookkeeping and what it now means for bookkeeping and accounting, as well as staffing decisions. But can you give us the detail of things as they apply today, Aaron? What can we expect? How much is the government going to support small businesses? What does it mean for us in terms of administering that?
Yeah, so aptly named, the new scheme is called the Extended Furlough Scheme. So the scheme itself is very similar to what we've seen in the past. So from terms of kind of administration and how we're going to actually deal with actually applying for it, they're all going to stay very, very similar to what we've had before.
We've essentially rolled back time, haven't we, to August? So we're reversing back to a position that's very similar to how we were all dealing with staffing decisions and furlough, particularly in August. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's really the essence of what we've got to remember. We've almost reset the clock again. So the scheme itself is that the idea is that you're paid up front, so as opposed to the job support where it was in arrears. So the idea is that you're paid up front for 80% of your staff salary. So we're back to that 80% position, whereas before we were starting to reduce down. There's still no national insurance relief, or the only difference I'd say is there's no national insurance relief as opposed to when we first went into lockdown, but that's not a massive amount of your wages, so it shouldn't be a deciding factor for you. It's just something to be aware of. There's still the
And are we still, sorry to interrupt you, Aaron, there's so many questions to ask here, but are we still needing to pay PAYE? So we're still paying tax on the payroll?
Yeah, so the payroll itself, in essence, is run just like any other payroll scheme. So you're still, if you're hitting those PAYE thresholds, if you're hitting national insurance thresholds, you still got to make the payments, including pension as well. The only difference is that you have the eligibility now of being able to claim in advance 80% of the salary of that your employee is actually suffering. Now you have a decision. You can either continue to pay 100% of their salary, or, as we'll come on to a bit in terms of kind of the administration side of things, you may have the ability to drop them down to 80% of their salary and only pay them what you've basically claimed back. There's still a maximum. There's a maximum of £2,500 per employee. So if they're above that threshold, then you won't be able to claim any more than that. And at the moment, we know that that's going to be running until December, and there's still rumours of that being extended even further after that. But we'll have to wait and see. The way that's been happening lately is that things are changing rapidly. Things are being postponed, things are moving around. So it's just a case of kind of keeping up to date on the news, keeping up to date in places like here at Farillio, where we'll make sure that you get that sort of information pushed your way. But it's more important than anything is just to understand what's happening now. And the biggest change and the biggest shift from when we were back in the start of the period is eligibility. So you still have to have a UK PAYE scheme, you still have to have a UK bank, but the biggest change is the eligibility of when that employee was actually on the scheme, on your payroll scheme. So when we first started, we had this very strict and very much a point where you had to have been employed prior to the scheme being eligible or being announced, should I say. And what that did was, and because of fraud and everything else, you can understand what the reasons were, but what that meant was that we didn't have as many businesses as we'd like being eligible for the scheme, and it caused a lot of confusion. There was a lot of complications in terms of getting eligibility. The good news is now that they've actually brought that eligibility point, so your employee must have been around by the 30th October. So as of recording now, it was just last week. So that's really helpful, and that's meant a lot more businesses are now eligible for the scheme, which they weren't before. So that means that during this second lockdown, we should see more of our businesses being able to go. And then just one last thing in terms of kind of news and how it changed from previously to now is that the introduction of flexible furlough that came through midway through the lockdown in the previous period, or midway through the recovery, should I say, that is still eligible for this particular scheme. So what that means is it gives you that ability to think about how you're going to bring your employees on, how you're going to actually pay them. And with flexible furlough, the idea that is if your business can still actually have some presence and still be able to work at some capacity, then you can pay for your employees for that particular point and then claim for anything outside of those areas.
So that's a big difference, isn't it? I mean, flexible furlough gave us all the ability to have people still working part-time, not their full-time hours, but benefiting both from, the government subsidy or the government grant, as well as being able to pay them a bit out of payroll too. So part-time working is still fine, and you can furlough people for the rest of that period and still benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where those key staffing decisions really come into play for us. Flexible furlough has been one of those real big important changes to the furlough scheme. So before, it was always that if your business is closed and you couldn't work whatsoever and do any commercial work whatsoever, then furlough was for you, and you had the opportunity to come in to claim for the scheme itself. But what that meant was that basically small businesses were having to make a decision: do we close completely, or do we try and survive? And now with that flexible furlough, it gives you that opportunity to try their best to survive, try their best to try and build up some form of business during the lockdown, albeit it might be a delivery service or an online only service. Or we've seen really great examples of the small business community pivoting and creating new ways of basically dealing with business they've never had to deal with before. And flexible furlough gives them that opportunity to do that. It gives them that safety net that they can give this a go. If it doesn't work, there's still the schemes available for them that they can go out to and they can push on to.
I think that's brilliant. One of the other things, when you mentioned staffing decisions a moment ago, let's come on and talk about staffing decisions, but also even staff who have never been furloughed before can be furloughed under this new scheme. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So whereas before, where we had this whole notion that it had to be a continuation of the furlough scheme, and again, it all went back to this eligibility pre the actual scheme ever being announced, that your employee had to have been on that payroll at that point. Now, because it's kind of had this big reset button, and again, 30th of October being that key deadline, means that as long as you had employees at that point, they're now eligible for the extended furlough scheme. So we've now got much more people being eligible for it and being able to put through. And I think, unfortunately, one of the things that this highlighted at the very beginning of furlough was there was businesses out there who weren't treating their payroll properly. They were being very they weren't being as disciplined as they should be, as what we would definitely kind of advise people to be, and they were having people who weren't properly on the payroll and everything else. I think what this has opened up is people are now far more on tune in terms of the benefits as well as the negatives of being on the payroll, and that means we've got a lot more people who are being in the payroll system properly, and that means that that's opened up more eligibility, and it's brought through more opportunity for people to get this scheme, and that's what we need during this second lockdown.
For sure. So in terms of the staffing decisions that small businesses are making, I mean, what are you seeing amongst your customer base? We're certainly seeing people start to plan, to prepare, to apply for this extended scheme. I think there's still a sense of shock about what it actually means and how we're going to get through the next 4 weeks, possibly even longer, depending on how long this lockdown period goes on for. What are you seeing your customers do on staffing decisions?
Well, it's actually really positive now, because we were coming to a point where we were coming off furlough and moving into job support scheme, and that was a really confusing scheme, and it caused a lot of conversations happen in terms of does it even apply to me? How does job support actually help my business? And we were having a lot of those conversations where it was a case by case, and we were having to really look into where the eligibility stood and where it could help businesses and how that could actually interact. Now that we've gone into full-blown furlough again, and this extended furlough scheme, the conversations are a lot more straightforward. It's a case of, okay, how do we keep our businesses afloat? How do we survive the lockdown one more time? And it means that we can kind of think about it on a more broader scale in terms of that eligibility and making sure that people are being supported.
Yeah, I mean, this is a serious point, isn't it? Because anyone listening to the radio or reading the news, or looking through social media, Twitter accounts, etc., it's not a happy place, is it? I mean, there are so many threats of layoffs, redundancies, businesses going down. I mean, pretty much every single time you look at anything that hosts the news, it's all about people and the huge cost of this year to job security and jobs creation. So are you seeing a sort of I don't know, breath of relief from your customer base, just to have a little bit longer to work out what they can do and how they protect jobs?
Yeah, exactly right. We were getting to the point where decisions were having to be made in terms of what next, again, because of the schemes not being available, because they're not having that support. And now it's a case of, okay, let's keep on until at least the furlough scheme is available to, and then we can kind of go from there. HMRC have announced, and they have kind of extended that job retention bonus, so that is still out there. So the idea of that is that if you do keep an employee on, continued through when it started all the way up until, at the moment, 31st January, but who knows when that extension could apply to. But when you did keep your employee on for that amount of time, there was a financial bonus to you of £1,000. That was always something that was in the back of people's heads. So I think that was a great incentive that was put there. But unfortunately, it was a case of, is that enough to be able to keep the jobs alive? So the incentives were there, and the discussions were around, is it worthwhile, is it not? But yeah, at the moment, the good news is that most people have now been able to go, right, okay, the support's still there for me, let's keep these jobs for now, and let's kind of assess when we come out of lockdown, because let's be honest, we don't know when that's going to be.
No, we don't. I mean, what we've seen is a slight lessening of activity in the sort of redundancy areas of our site and the layoffs in our own platform. So I'm hoping that's a good sign, and that we have got a little bit longer to try so hard to keep jobs safe. I mean, we're going into the Christmas period as well. This is a horrible time for anybody to be worried about job security. All right, so Aaron, let's move on and talk about what this means in terms of accounting and what we should be doing right now. When should we be applying for this extended scheme? Can we do it now? You mentioned that it's money up front rather than in arrears. How's it all work? What do we need to do?
The good news is, from an administration point of view, as I alluded to before, it's very, very similar to what we've already seen. So there should be no shocks in terms of the information needed and provided and how we give that information there. So if you've used your accountant in the past, they'll still be able to do it for you. Or if you've been doing it yourself, it's going to be the same process that you've been going through. Now, the eligibility wise, or the fact that the scheme open wise, we can now start to look at making those claims. Basically, you're following on from where you are before. So whenever your last period that you've been making your claims, just make sure that you can then see it as an extension. So whenever you've made your previous claims before, start putting into this procedure the same sort of time and give yourself that same time frame to get through. The one thing I would urge every single business out there to do, though, is, and we've seen it in our businesses with ours, is this scheme was all designed around getting that support to businesses fast, get it over to them as soon as they possibly can. So when HMRC were looking at things like possible fraud or possible looking into wrongdoing in terms of the scheme, they were always going to be looking at that retrospectively. Now, the HMRC don't have a magic wand to know exactly which businesses are doing this right and which aren't. So it is just a case of investigations and checking into things, and they're going to be sending letters out to businesses. One thing I would say is, 99% of the businesses we've ever looked at have had no issues with this whatsoever. It's just a real quick, simple check. And as long as you've got those reports and those procedures in place, and you've got all the documentation that we've spoke about before, so making sure you're keeping hours together, making sure you've got contracts up to date, making sure that you've use the Farillio platform, look at the solutions available on the platform itself, make sure all of those bits are in place. And then when those letters do come, and they do seem really nasty and they do seem really forceful, but all they're doing there is just making sure that they've given the support to the right businesses. And you guys are the right businesses, you are the ones who should be getting this support. So as long as you've got that information there, you'll be absolutely fine. So you just need to apply or reply to the letter as accordingly. Again, we've had no issues whatsoever with the claims we've made, and most of the businesses out there have had no problems whatsoever. But just make sure you've got all of your ducks in a row beforehand, and then you should be absolutely fine.
Great words of reassurance there. So we could start applying in the normal way. If we've never applied for furlough before, Aaron, obviously this might be a bit of a new game. We're not excluded. We can now benefit from the scheme. What's your advice to somebody doing this for the first time?
For the first time, it is all about just making sure that you get the right advice just on that first application. There's plenty of advice out there. So we've got YouTube videos, we've got elements, even on Farillio itself. There's advice there on exactly how to get that or get that first application in, and make sure you feel comfortable with it. But do reach out if you've got an accountant. Push it to them to get done. That's going to be the best way. They've had to do countless of these already, so they'll be able to just get that claim in for you straight away. If you don't have an accountant, though, again, the advice is out there, and my advice is just get that claim in as soon as possible. Don't sit on it. Get it in as soon as your eligibility opens and as soon as the window's open for you. And it's all done through the government website, so there's no kind of having to use third-party solutions or anything like that. You just go on the government website. And it will tell you straight away if you're eligible, not eligible, and then you'll just have to follow the on-screen prompts from there. But kudos to HMRC and their process. It's actually a really straightforward solution they've created for us, and they created for overnight. So just follow the on-screen prompts, and you should be absolutely fine.
Perfect. Right. Well, while we've got you, Aaron, what else can we get as small businesses right now? So the government's announced a series of other measures, extended support. Can you give us a really quick summary of what else we should be thinking about as small businesses right now?
Yeah, so the one that kind of gets forgotten quite a lot, and just on the process of payroll as well, is the coronavirus statutory sick pay rebate scheme. So basically, they've taken the normal sick SSP scheme, the normal paid for sick pay, basically, and they've just made that scheme much more less rigid, should I say, in terms of coronavirus. So if you do have employees who are suffering from coronavirus, then there's more quicker financial support available to you than you would in the typical SSP scheme. So do take advantage of that. Do look at those details if you have got any employees that are suffering from it. If you're in the self-employed world and you're still or you've had the income support scheme before, the good news is that's been extended. What we've seen with the self-employed income support scheme is that normally it falls in line with how the furlough scheme is. So normally you're seeing the same percentages coming through, and that's what we've basically been told, that we're getting roughly the same support package from there. So that's definitely been extended. There's talks about it going all the way to April 2021, or at least there'll be some form of support in April 2021. We just don't know exactly what those percentages are going to be at this point. So if you've relied on that self-employed income support scheme in the past, then good news is that that's going to be available to you going forward. There's more grants available from local councils. So just like at the very beginning of lockdown, again, it's all deja vu. We had that £10,000 eligibility if you had rates. Well, there's a similar scheme coming again. This time, though, instead of having a big payment up front, it's all about smaller payments coming on a month-by-month basis. It's all dependent on rateable value. So if you are paying rates or if you're eligible for small rates, then do look at your local council, do look at your local authority, and then you should be eligible for some schemes there. Speaking of local authorities, they've got many different grants available. Every local authority has got different small business grants. The idea of that is to support small businesses. So go and have a look at your local website and the council and have a look and see if there's any schemes available for you. Every council level authority has got a different eligibility, a different way of applying and everything else. But it's so far from what we've seen from our clients, even though we've got clients all over the UK, we've seen that it's been a pretty straightforward process. So it's just a case of following on there. Couple more though. Mortgage holidays have been extended. So if you are from a personal point of view, if that is something that you've been reliant on, thankfully that's been extended as well. 31st of January is what we believe the extension's gone to. But again, these dates are all up in the air in terms of kind of what's happening and how long we're in lockdown for. But the good news is it has been extended. It was due to finish 31st of October. So thankfully that extension there has been a massive lifeline to a lot of small businesses, because it's not just about keeping your small business afloat, but it's about obviously supporting your family as well. And then finally, that bounce back loan that's been crucial to small businesses during this time. The great news about that is that's also been extended. So just to give some context of what the bounce back loan is, it's basically the quickest and simplest way for you as a small business to get yourself some financial support. The idea is that it's a really risk-free loan that's supported by the government. The first 12 months is interest-free and also repayment-free completely. And then you've got up to 10 years to be able to actually pay this money back at really competitive rates. Probably by far the cheapest loan you'll ever see on the market at any point in time. So it's just, I urge people to look at that bounce back loan. With the extension, also came with the news as well that there's a top-up available as well. So if you've already applied for the bounce back loan, but at the time you didn't need the full eligibility and the full amount that you needed, then you have the ability to go and take a top up. When it comes to eligibility wise, it's a really straightforward scheme. The idea is that it's as simple as possible to get you applied and get that money into your bank. As long as you've got a UK bank, eligible UK bank should I say, then you have the ability to claim for it. You got 25% of your turnover is what's available, up to a maximum of £50,000. And the idea then is that you'll be able to make it really simple to go and get that loan done. One thing to kind of plug as well here is we did a Go Far Faster show. I think it was about 3-4 weeks ago, but it's definitely, have a look on YouTube. And we had the brilliant Kevin Hollinrape MP on there, and he spoke in depth about how these challenger banks and how banks are coping with bounce back loans and how eligibility is there. So I do give a plug for that one. But in a nutshell, basically, if you're on a high street bank, you should have no problem whatsoever of getting that bounce back loan. If you have been using a quote unquote a challenger bank, so your Revoluts and your Starlings and the banks of them sort of ilk, then you might have to look at your personal bank account to be able to get eligibility for a bounce back loan at that point. But there's a lot of news out there on how and where to get that information on. So do. But in a nutshell, definitely consider the ability to look at that bounce back loan, because for our businesses, that's been the biggest lifeline out of all of them in terms of quickly getting cash into a business that they can then look at how they're going to survive going forward.
Yeah, ours too. I mean, I think the raft of reliefs, you're absolutely right. It is completely worth keeping on top of them and applying for whatever you can, particularly if you're in survival mode, and particularly if it means protecting jobs as well. Thank you, Aaron. That was a whistle-stop tour. I know there's a lot of relief out there, but I think the message from all of us is go for what you need right now. Don't hang about, just get it. There's too much at stake not to do that. Do, however, just manage your director's duties. If you're running a limited company and you're applying for these things, make sure that you are still conforming with your own company rules. They shouldn't be a blocker, but make sure you are conscious about taking on debt, applying for different forms of relief, reconfiguring staffing, etc., just in case there's any rules. It's usually in your articles of association, but just cross-check that there's nothing there that might cause you a bit of a hiccup later on. Nothing should prevent you from surviving, however. Aaron, final question from me very quickly. Is there anything else that our viewers, our audience should be thinking about right now to keep on top of all of this and to power through these really extraordinary, rather horrible times?
Yeah, and I feel like a broken record on this one because it's kind of that go-to that I bring up time and time again, but it is cash flow. It is keeping on top of your cash flow. But when we went into the first lockdown, I was pleasantly surprised by how many businesses took that on board. And we saw so many clients utilising software and utilising just simple Excel spreadsheets just to have a breakdown of what their cash flow is, what their run rate is, and how are they going to plan for these unprecedented times, and how are they going to look at ways in which they can use the support available from the government in the best possible way. And I just urge every business out there listening to do the same thing again. Use technology, use QuickBooks Online is what we always push, but there's other ones out there where now they have a cash flow forecast built directly in the product. It was released during lockdown. It was released during this idea 4 times like this. So I do really urge everyone to just keep an eye on that cash flow. Use your simple idea of just predicting what money's coming in versus what money's coming out, and just make sure you're on top of it now. That's where the bounce back loan and everything else has been so crucial, because businesses have been able to go, I need to have X amount to plug the gap to be able to keep myself going. And that's when, the application goes through, and you can have more confidence then that you're borrowing responsibly, and you're borrowing at a point where that business can still go on. We say this a lot of Boffics, but we want businesses not just survive but to thrive. And to do that, you've got to understand the basic principles, and unfortunately that comes down to cash flow.
It does. What comes in and what goes out, there's nothing more critical than that, even in good times, but certainly right now. Aaron, thank you so much for all those nuggets of wisdom, for those updates. We will, as times roll on, as the government makes more announcements, obviously reel him back in, folks, and make sure that we keep you guys up to date. If you have questions about anything that you've seen on today's session, then do let us know. We are here to get those all-important answers to you, and I couldn't recommend the guys at Boffics more for being on top of this, for being in the trenches with every single one of their customers, our customers too. Don't feel that you're alone. There are great people out there who can support you and can help you not just to survive but to thrive, to shamelessly pinch Aaron's strap line there. So do reach out. That's all for today's show. Again, Aaron, massive thanks for joining us.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure as always.
We'll see you again next time.